So, Cynthia, thank you very much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership. But before we walk into the future, can you tell us a little bit about your own background? Where did you grow up?
Well, thank you, Dr. Nick, for inviting me to your platform. It's quite an honor. I'm actually from Johannesburg. I was born in Soweto in Para, and I spent part of my childhood between South Africa and Zimbabwe and Zambia. And I moved back home to Johannesburg when I was 15 full-time. But before then, I was just hopping between these countries because my father was part of the liberation movement at the time. And that's how my mother and my father actually met, and hence the hopping around until the age of 15.
Right. And tell us, what was your dream career when you grew up?
Well, my dad was a doctor, so I used to admire seeing a lot of nurses in their uniforms and stuff. So that was my first reference point of a career that I would have wanted to go into at the time, like in my early childhood. But I think in high school, it started being very trendy to be a DJ. So I thought I wanted to be a DJ
Right.
I think in my teenage life, I wanted to be a DJ. Yeah, so I went through a lot of changes in that regard.
Right. And tell us, in your early days, who inspired you?
Well, like I said, I was hopping between one place and another when I was a child, and the central piece of that was my grandmother, because she was around and she was able to basically move with me and take care of me. And she, I think, dedicated most of her life to raising me in my early childhood. So she shapes how I view the world and the issues that I'd like to address. But that being said, I did have a good pair of parents who also put in the right foundation for me to know how to model myself towards achieving the things that I want to achieve, and how to basically navigate myself towards achieving certain goals, how I study, how I communicate, and so on and so forth. My mom was more of the dream big and go for the stars, and my dad was the one who would say, well, be very cautious and calculate, and both of those really did play a huge role in how I actually package my life and go through life, if I could call it that.
Now, Cynthia, you have a very interesting and impressive career history. You started at Wits Business School, you then moved to Standard Bank, the National Development Agency, the Innovation Hub, US8, and today at Ingram Micro. Can you maybe share a highlight or two from your career?
Oh, well, thank you, Dr. Nick. I am quite humbled by that. And I think I have been blessed to have been able to work in all these interesting and inspiring companies. But for me, my turning point in my career wasn't in the field of work. My turning point was when I actually quit one of my jobs in one of the companies that you mentioned. I actually quit because I was going through a burnout, and I quit my job and I started to work on a personal project. And during that period when I was working on a personal project, I actually started to understand, A, what caused the burnout, and 2, what is it that I can do in future to avoid this burnout, and 3, when I do go back into the working space, what is the contribution that I'm not going to negotiate on in terms of who I show up at work as a professional woman, as a Black professional woman for that matter. What is it that I want to have as my legacy? So during that time of being of taking a leave of absence and just focusing on myself, it did map the turning point of my career, because when I went into the workplace, I was able to vocalize what I did aspire to acquiring as far as my career mapping was concerned, and my growth and development in that space, as well as trying to fit myself with the right people that could help me to push myself to achieve those goals.
And Cynthia, you're also a Mandela Washington Fellow and a Young African Leaders Fellow. Can you tell us a little bit more about that aspect of your career?
I think that was one of is one of the most significant achievements that I hold as a person. I think everybody is proud of certain things that they have done. I am proud of being part of this wonderful community that focuses on shaping young African leaders and giving us tools and exposure to basically refine our skill sets and tap into areas that we would not have normally had the chance and the opportunity to do so. So being part of this fellowship not only challenges you through meeting your own peers from across the African continent who share different stories that could inspire you, motivate you, change your views on thinking, but it also opens doors for you to work in places that, I mean, I would have never gotten an opportunity to work in USID in Washington, D.C. was it not for this wonderful opportunity from Mandela Washington Fellowship. And many of my colleagues or fellows in MWF have since experienced a lot of positive growth in their careers as a result of being alumni from this program. So I'm proud to be a part of this family, and I encourage anybody who is a young African leader to take their time to visit the site and apply for these opportunities, because they are free and they're readily available, and they do really change one's career trajectory.
And Cynthia, tell us, what is driving you today?
There are quite a number of things, but I think to keep it short, the most important goal for me is happiness and peace. Having gone through this pandemic and gone through a lot in life as an individual, I have come to appreciate the fact that when one is happy and peaceful, they are centered, and that centeredness enables them to focus better on whether it's their personal growth, career growth, social growth. So my drive is to ensure that whatever it is that I engage myself in is something that does not jeopardize my peace, does not compromise my happiness, and is a value add to those aspects such that it keeps me inspired and motivated to think bigger, to do better. So that would be my primary focus, or my driving elements, if I could say.
Now, Cynthia, looking into the future, and I know it's a big question, but what does the future of leadership mean to you?
Well, I mean, it's like you rightfully put it, it's a big question, and there are a lot of things to consider. I mean, firstly, the definition of leadership on its own. Are we talking about leaders in the professional sense who have been given titles? Are we talking about leaders who have chosen to absorb responsibilities, and so on and so forth? So I think that depending on that, there are a variety of expectations and there are a variety of things to look into. But I think fundamentally, the future of leadership is more challenging for anybody who absorbs this responsibility. We are living in a global society that is so fast-paced and dynamic in nature. We're looking at changes that will take place in the next 10 years that took at least 50 years to have arrived prior. So we will be going through phenomenal changes in the next 10 years than we have gone through in the past 50 or 60 years or so. So what does that mean for leaders? It means to be a leader of foresight, one who does not necessarily only focus on this fiscal year, the return on investment for this year or that year, but to have foresight. How do you develop foresight? In my view, I think one should always be in a space of continual learning, being able to tap into different streams of insight and information, to continuously critically challenge themselves to learn more. I mean, things are really changing so rapidly. We're now looking at things like employees being able to work from anywhere. So what does that mean in terms of the skills pool that we will be attracting? What does it mean in terms of labor laws and regulations? How will leaders be able to benchmark salaries and pay? You may want to hire someone in India and you're based in South Africa, and somebody in India who is of that role gets paid more than the junior person in this role in South Africa. These are interesting things that are going to be coming up. We're looking at things like automation. How is this going to affect us going forward as leaders, when now we're looking at substitution of the human workforce into robotics, artificial intelligence, and all of those things. So to be a strong and impactful leader, in my view, you have to be willing to consistently learn, to step out of your comfort zone and challenge yourself. You have to be aware that good ideas and good information can come from anywhere. But most importantly, I think you cannot be a good leader without having empathy. Empathy to put yourself outside your own body and step into the shoes of those that work for you, your workforce, being able to understand diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how does that actually impact your workforce, and how does that come up in the culture of the company that you're trying to create, given the fact that it's very fluid nowadays and there's a lot to consider. Our employees who are coming in with different set of values as compared to maybe employees 20, 30 years ago. Employees nowadays are looking at the brand equity. They're looking at how they are viewed for being associated or working with a particular brand. They're looking at being in a place which gives them a lot of emotional stability. So there are a lot of challenges to consider as a leader, and it's an interesting future to look at, but at the same time, there are quite a number of variables that one should actually consider to be successful.
And Cynthia, what have you learned from your own leadership journey that you consider most important for building and empowering future leaders?
I think the first one is education. So education in a broad sense, not just the academic kind of education. I have learned that it's important to continuously learn. I've also learned that it's important to surround yourself with people who are authentic enough to challenge your views, who are authentic enough to celebrate you, who are authentic enough to caution you. And most importantly, I have learned in my journey that there is no success that is singular as far as leadership is concerned. There are so many parts of the system, looking at people that work for us, looking at people that work with us, and looking at our clientele, and giving each and every member of that particular system enough credit, enough respect, enough exposure, makes up for a great culture and a vibrant environment for people to perform, for people to deliver at their utmost best. So I've found that that particular formula has worked in my experience working with people and having people work with me. So yeah.
And tell us, when you speak to aspiring leaders, what do you tell them about social media? How should they navigate social media to build their own personal brand?
Well, personally, I'm not that much active on social media, and I'm a little bit old school, maybe one would say, in that. And I think that the first thing I would say is that in my view, is a huge need for popularity, to be seen to be doing rather than to be doing. And that for me is the conundrum that I have with parts of social media, not all. And I would firstly say to show up on any social media with your personal brand as authentically, to represent yourself as you are now, but with also the long-term foresight of what it would mean should you go back to these archives and see yourself, right? And also to not be so quick to seek celebritism, to seek recognition, but rather to seek to achieve pertinent goals that you want to achieve, and the rest will follow. But that being said, I support people who run their careers on social media. It has made a lot of people successful. It's just not something that I personally invest much time to it. And therefore, this is the only advice to my young leaders, to not aspire to be seen to be doing, but rather to actually do something meaningful. And then the rest will sort of like come through.
And Cynthia, we are living in challenging times and turbulent times. What is your advice for future leaders in terms of challenges? What are some of the biggest challenges they should expect to encounter in their career?
Well, I think it goes back to the other question, and I think I tapped into it. The changing, I call it the social and work evolution that we're experiencing. The development of IT as a wide spectrum, looking at IoT, looking at artificial intelligence, how that is going to factor into the workplace, looking at development of skills. If we look back, particularly back home in South Africa, we have quite a serious issue of skills deficit, right? And we want to bring up skills that would match what the market is requiring as we are trying to immerse ourselves into this fourth industrial revolution. There's quite a serious gap. And how does the private sector work with the public sector to address this issue without the private sector feeling that, well, how are we going to measure our return on investment? How are we going to ensure that what our investment has been put in this skill sector is going to directly channel back into our companies and so forth? So the conversations of leaders, both in the private and public sector, are going to continue to be challenging, to be vast. So I am waiting with bated breath to see the solutions that will be coming through to ensure that these challenges are addressed. And I think ultimately the biggest challenge would be the challenge of self, because one of the things I've realized is the inability of certain leaders to change their standpoints or their worldviews or their belief systems. And that would be the critical challenge that individual leaders would have to face. How do I step outside myself to learn new things, to unlearn certain things, to grow and to accept that certain things would never be, or certain things must work in a different manner? So, I mean, these are some of the few things that I can actually think of right now.
And Cynthia, if you were to design a curriculum for future leaders, what are some of the new skills you would want to factor in?
Well, that's an interesting question. At the top of my mind, I think it should be mandatory for any profession to learn soft skills, your emotional intelligence, your empathies, your communication, those soft elements would definitely be featured in this new curriculum that I would design. And I think, it goes without saying that there are certain types of academic trainings that give or enable people to develop sharper critical thinking skills, so the things that have a lot of quantitative analysis balanced with a bit of qualitative, and depending on the technical requirement of the skill, one would have to say there's a higher focus on the quantitative or a lesser focus on the quantitative and so forth. But my skill set would definitely involve issues around understanding automation of performance delivery, automation of performance management information, and the soft skills that are required for people to actually work well in a very diverse environment.
And Cynthia, as a mentor to future leaders, can you maybe share a success story or two where you mentored an upcoming leader and that person took your advice to heart?
I've been very fortunate that my career grew quite quickly in a short space of time. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I had very significant positions. And as a result, I would have people, whether that were working with me formally or people that were within my social circles, reaching out to seek my advice or my opinion on how they could map their careers similarly, or how they could navigate the workspace, so to say. One of my proudest is one of the gentlemen I worked with back home in one of the companies that you mentioned earlier today. And this young man, when I joined the company, he was working as an intern, and he had quite a number of responsibilities that were given to him. And as a result, he was very spread thin, and it was rather difficult for HR or people who were in his leadership to identify his core skill set, right? And I remember sitting down with the team and asking him to stay behind and asking him about basically his childhood, his background and what he was aspiring to do. And I spent quite some time with him from that point onwards, because our conversation led me to realizing that he was very, he had an analytical mind, and he had a good way of communicating with people who were both his age mates, his peers, as well as seniors. And given the fact that I was working for a state-owned entity, that's quite a critical skill set, especially at that age. So working with him and showing him the areas that I thought were his strengths and areas that I thought were his weaknesses enabled us jointly to come up with how we could map his career growth. And he did take my advice to heart that here he registered for a course in UNISA. And as we speak, that young gentleman currently occupies my former position in this company. He has published a few papers, and we still keep in touch. And as far as mentees are concerned, he's one of my success stories that I'm very proud of.
And Cynthia, in your leadership role, and maybe in your learning journey, who are the kind of role models of leadership that you would recommend future leaders should learn from?
Well, Dr. Nick, human beings are fallible. So I would caution people from mapping anything around a human, but rather mapping things around these humans' principles, right? What principles can I extrapolate from so and so that I emulate and so forth? Because looking at a person and trying to emulate them, not only is it unauthentic, but it's a dangerous way to lead one's life. So for me, the people that I take certain principles and key methodologies, if I could say, to implementing some of the things I do, people like Mteto Nyati. I work in IT, and having done such a transition from being in the public sector and going into a private sector and in IT specifically, I found a lot of comfort in how he also transitioned into IT, how he managed to turn around underperforming companies into top performing companies, and how he handled his conversations with employees, how he handled his conversations with clients. And those principles for me, how those humane fundamental skills of communication, empathy, I find them as critical drivers in optimizing performance and creating very strong relationships that are critical in any business relationship or otherwise. I also look up to Utulima Donsela. I think that she embodies integrity. She's a woman who, during a very tough time, was unshaken and unwavering in following the principles and the legislative demands of her role without being intimidated by any of the people that thought that she would succumb to their bullying. And that, for me, not only as a South African woman, but as a Black South African woman, is something that I hold dear to heart. Having her absorb that position and being a pioneer, it set a different tone, particularly during the time I was working in public sector, of how we as women were being perceived and the kind of conversations that we were starting to be involved in, and the kind of respect, the trickle-down respect that came from her integrity and how she handled the business. I also look up to Tsagani Maluleke. She's the current Auditor General. I had a privilege of going to school with her. We attended a program at some point, a postgraduate program, and she is consistent in terms of her hard work, her integrity, showing up, treating people with respect, and pushing the agenda of proper performance information management, the integrity of auditing, and making auditing a fun and exciting prospect, especially given the fact that we were attending a class with quite a number of critical leaders in the public sector. Her ability to sell auditing is not a scary function, but a critical fundamental function of governance, made it very exciting for a lot of people. And she managed to convert, if I could say, people to having a different perception and a different understanding of auditing. And I'm not surprised she currently holds the role that she has, because she's a very hardworking and intelligent woman. Lastly, I would say that one of the people that nobody probably has heard about is a mentor of mine who has actually helped me to show up and shape my career for the past 10 years. His name is Tafara Mwandi, and he is a phenomenal friend and mentor who has overachieved. At the age of 23, he became the first African actuary to fully pass without any fails. So he has 0 fails in his academic journey as an actuary. But he didn't feel that that was enough. He continued to challenge himself, and he went on. He did an MBA in Stanford, and he also did a master's degree in computer science, and he completely transformed his career. What I respect and admire about him is his humanity and his humility. He is a very down-to-earth person who engages with anybody from the bottom of the food chain all the way to the top in the same manner. But the fact that as intelligent and as successful as he was, he felt it was not enough. He continued to challenge himself and to change his career path at a very late stage where everybody thought, you know what, you're doing so well, you're a senior manager in a very prominent company in South Africa, why would you want to leave this job? And he continues to guide me, to caution me, to celebrate me, and it is a very integral part of the journey of Cynthia as far as my professional life is concerned.
Now, Cynthia, how can our listeners connect with you, and where should they follow you?
Well, like I said, I'm a bit of a dodo. I'm a bit of an old-fashioned one. I'm not that much active on social media except for LinkedIn. So please feel free to invite me. I never reject any invites on LinkedIn. Feel free to send me any messages. I'll be more than happy to engage when I can.
And Cynthia, last but not least, what is your advice for the millions of learners around the world that are now considering their career and wondering what are the success principles for a successful career, for beginning a successful career? What would you say to them? Maybe mentioning 1 or 2 success principles.
Well, this is something that makes me so sad because we are not doing well, particularly back home in terms of career development. And many young people are actually experiencing challenges in how they can navigate that. So I find this a very critical question that really touches my heart. And I would start by saying that the first thing is being authentic to yourself. Some people can study an accounting degree and become accountants and not be as successful as somebody who has maybe studied fashion design. And the difference could simply be that the other person chose to follow their passion. They chose to invest in what it is that they really love to do, and they can wake up each and every day feeling motivated to chase that goal. But that being said, following your passion is also a little bit tricky, given the context that we exist in back home. The passion that you might have might not necessarily be a skill set that the market is looking for. So striking that balance, how do I find pockets of things that excite me in a particular career that is viable, where I know I can get a job, where I know I can be a meaningful contributor and still have things that I love to do, and use that as a stepping stone to guide myself towards achieving that goal of, or moving towards where it is that I intend on being. So not everybody is going to start with getting a career that is something that they're passionate of. But if you could find fundamental blocks, I'm an analytical person. I like to analyze. So even if I don't get a job being a data analyst, but I could start here as an administration clerk and then I can move on. The ability to know that there's a time for everything and that sacrifice is required for success to be acquired. So I would say that those are the key things that these youngsters should try and sort of navigate. But I think ultimately the last thing I would say is that do not be afraid to approach people who are doing things that you think you would like to do, that you aspire to do, and to ask them for time, to ask them for advice and guidance on how they paved their way, and perhaps that could be also an instrumental way of getting to understand for yourself what it is that you can and can't do as far as pursuing your desired career.
Well, Cynthia, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom into the future of leadership and reminding us that foresight is a critical leadership capability today, more than ever.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm very humbled to be part of this platform. I actually never thought, given the people I've seen being interviewed here, I did not see myself being in the same caliber as them. It's still very humbling, and I'm very grateful for having been given this opportunity.
Well, your insights are truly valuable, and I look forward to the feedback from the listeners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nick.